Welcome back to Shaboom. I'm your host, Rick K. Jones, and today we're going to discuss what I think is a very serious topic, and that's prejudice in America today. So the word of the day is prejudice. You know, what makes America so unique and so great is our great diversity. We were a country founded by immigrants. I was recently in Alaska and was reminded that even the Native Americans weren't from here. They crossed the Bering Sea. It looked like there was a landmass at some point, probably a glacier, ice and snow, that all of these people from Europe, or from Asia really, crossed the Bering Sea and then spread out throughout North and South America. We had lots and lots of European immigrants, Asian immigrants, Latin American immigrants. So many people have come here over the years. Again, we're a country that allowed and celebrated freedom of religion, and that was pretty rare. And that brought so many different peoples to America. We enslaved people from Africa, but we recovered and made the descendants of those slaves freed peoples to pursue their American dreams. We welcomed immigrants from Eastern Europe that were fleeing from persecutions, the Irish, that were coming here escaping from a tragic famine, Southern Italians seeking jobs and a better way of life, the Chinese who came here to build our railroads and work in our mines, Middle Eastern peoples who came largely to Detroit, in Dearborn, Michigan, to work in the auto industry, the Mexicans who first picked our crops and then assimilated into our culture, and so many, many more. Each brought not only a great work ethic, but left parts of their culture on our society. We are truly a melting pot. On my podcast, United Taste of America, where we explore American culinary history, I like to call American cuisine this giant bowl of gumbo. Think about gumbo. It's four cultures in one pot. It's the roux that's French. It's the sofrito, or the Holy Trinity, onion, bell pepper, celery, that comes from the Spanish. It's the okra that comes from Africans. And it's the sassafras that came from Native Americans. So you've got all these different cultures in one pot. And so I like to think that our whole country is a big old bowl of gumbo where we've all come from different places. So with that in mind, why do we seem to have such great animosity towards others that are different from us? I really don't understand that, because that's what makes life the spice of life, the differences that we have. I recently read an article by Ken Griffin. You may know Ken Griffin. He's a billionaire. He's got a company called Citadel Investments. He has been making a lot of waves because he moved his corporate headquarters from Chicago to Miami. Talk about a diverse city, Miami, but a city that's very pro-working. And Ken was very critical of our immigration issues, or our problems today, because he says, we're failing to bring new people to the table, and we got lots of entry-level or low-income jobs that are going unfilled due to the shortage of immigrants. And we need these people to start their American dream journey, filling these jobs that no one else seems to want. Somebody's got to pick our crops. Somebody's got to rake the pine straw. Somebody's got to wash the dishes. Somebody's got to work in restaurants. When we filmed United Taste of America and we're filming our episode on the state of Washington, we were focused on the Chinese immigrants that came to Washington. We had a hard time filming because nobody wanted to be seen on camera because of what's going on right now with ICE and other things. It's really, really an interesting time from that. But I think Ken Griffin has a point. We need to continue to legally allow people to come to this country and pursue and chase the American dream. Our songs this week on our musical playlist represent both our great diversity and the struggle for acceptance. So it's a yin and a yang. The song of the week is from Gladys Knight and the Pips. Gladys is from my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia. And this is the classic song, Jump on the Friendship Train. Other songs on our playlist are Black and White by Three Dog Night, The Love Train by the OJs, the great Mahalia Jackson doing the classic civil rights song, We Shall Overcome, Bob Dylan doing These Times They Are A-Changing, Stevie Wonder's Living for the City, and the great song Glory by John Legend and Common. Great musical playlist today that I think you're going to really, really like. Again, I don't understand prejudice of any kind, and I really don't understand anti-Semitism. I just don't get it. Jews have been persecuted all over the world for centuries, and as a Christian man and as a follower of Jesus, I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't understand why people are so against many Jewish people. And I understand right now there's some issues between, are you really mad at Jewish people or are you mad at Israel because of the so-called mistreatment in Gaza of Palestinian people? But I still don't get it, and I don't get the historic persecution of Jews because it's really unprecedented. And so my guest today brings an interesting perspective on both American politics along with prejudice and anti-Semitism. Norm Ornstein is a famous political scientist and scholar. He's a distinguished professor and best known for his work at the American Enterprise Institute. Let's welcome Norm to Shaboom today for a really interesting interview. Hey, Norm, thanks for being with us today.
Of course. Absolutely my pleasure, Rick.
Well, I appreciate it. I always start with the same question for every guest. Where were you reared, and who were the early influencers in your life?
So it's a little more complicated for me. I was born in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, the birthplace, as some baby boomers would know, of Francis Gum. Let me see if you know, Rick.
Judy Garland.
Exactly. But moved around a fair amount when I was very young, moved back to Minneapolis, and had a lot of my upbringing there. But my father was Canadian originally, and we ended up spending a fair amount of my early life in Canada. I went to high school in Winnipeg, Manitoba, came back to Minnesota, went to the University of Minnesota. I would say that, my family, my mother's family, was very much steeped in politics and unions. My grandfather, who had come from Russia and ended up in a small town in northern Minnesota, then moved to Minneapolis, became the head of the laundry workers union there. And he was one of the original kitchen cabinet that got Hubert Humphrey to run for mayor. My uncle, my mother's youngest sibling, ended up in the state legislature for many years. When I was at the University of Minnesota, and I was very young, I'd skipped a number of grades. I would say there were people in politics and public life who really had an important impact on me. Humphrey was one, and others. There was a Republican who was the attorney general who came to the university many times, and I kind of bonded with him, named Doug Head. And then there were a number of professors, one of whom, the late Gene Eidenberg, had been a congressional fellow, had worked on Capitol Hill for a year before coming to teach. And I was captivated by him and decided I wanted to do that, and ended up, as I went on to graduate school, to become a congressional fellow, come to Washington, work for a year, and that really helped establish my career. But as much as anything, it was a kind of politics designed to help working people, to better the society, to fight against discrimination, that kind of shaped my worldview.
It's interesting. Minnesota is an interesting state because it has a lot of diversity. There's not a dominant party necessarily. People have their own opinions, make up their own minds. And so that was probably an interesting place. And then the Canadian influence is also kind of fascinating, I think, to give you a different kind of perspective of, and especially of Western Canada, which is a, totally different beast
Yeah.
than the Eastern part in terms of politics. But, you came from folks that came to this country or came to Canada too, to build a better life. And with that was this kind of understanding that if I'm going to have the opportunity, I'm also going to give back. I'm going to be a part of the society, because in many cases there was restrictions, as you know, in Europe, that almost a caste system that discriminated against so many people that they couldn't participate in certain things. And I remember a speech that Ronald Reagan gave at one point where he said, you can move to Germany, but you can never be German. You can go to Japan and never be Japanese, but you can come to the United States and work hard and contribute to society and become an American. And so we're kind of the only country in the world where that really happens.
Growing up in a family where I was the third generation, but immigration and the value of immigration was deeply inculcated in me, and I saw exactly what you're saying. And you know, we may or may not want to talk about this more, but to see that shattered right now has been very, very painful.
Well, I think it's been painful for all of us, and we do want to get into that a little bit today. So, once you got out of grad school, did you know that that kind of your path was going to be to teach? I know you were at Catholic University for a while. I mean,
Yeah.
was that you ended up being a political consultant in a lot of ways, but was the educational part, was it because of who had taught you and you kind of wanted to follow in those footsteps?
So, a cousin of mine who was a physician, actually an older role model, tried to push me to become both a doctor and a lawyer. And I started out in pre-med and decided after a year that it wasn't for me. Um, and what I discovered, I was very young. When I went to the University of Minnesota, I was actually a sophomore, but I was 15 years old as a sophomore, and I lived at home. And this is a huge university, the University of Minnesota, but I found a home there. And I have people decades later, mentors of mine, back when I was an undergraduate in the 1960s. Most of them are gone. A few still remain. I still have relationships with. And I looked at the lifestyles that they had. I looked at what they were doing, and I thought, yeah, I want to be an academic. So I went and got a PhD and went on to teach. And I taught for 15 years, but then I moved to a think tank. I actually had been involved as a tenured full professor, and I was, in a great place. I could teach what I wanted when I wanted. I didn't have a lot of administrative burdens. But a colleague of mine, a woman, was denied tenure and promotion for all the wrong reasons by a very bad and evil chair of our department. I became her advocate inside the university. It didn't end well, and I quit and went to the think tank full time. And I've, mentored a lot of students, graduate students since. I've taught in universities around the country. But I'm still an academic, but I moved away from teaching full time a long time ago.
Tell me about the American Enterprise Institute. Tell me what it does and what you've done there.
So I went to AEI part time in 1978, along with my longtime colleague and writing partner and research partner, Tom Mann, who was then running the Political Science Association. And we had friends and mentors at AEI. One of them was a great political scientist named Austin Ranney. Another, Jean Kirkpatrick, back when she was a Democrat, actually. And we pitched to them. It was sort of a center right organization, but one that really focused on trying to get ideas out there that were straightforward. And the people who ran it believed in the marketplace of ideas, believed that if you got all the ideas out there in a free market, that the right ones would prevail. So we pitched the idea of doing a project on Congress, sort of tracking it as an institution. And they bought it, and we were there part-time for a number of years. Then I went to half-time before going to full-time. Um, AI had a lot of different people with different expertise, whether it be in politics and governance, or the law, or foreign policy, or economics. And their perspectives ranged pretty widely. There were some who were very conservative, others who weren't. I was an outlier in a lot of ways. I was not a conservative person. I used to, when people would ask me, I would refer to myself using a term that had been coined by Al Gore, that I was a raging moderate. But what attracted me to AEI, other than the fact that there were some really interesting and good people there, was that I had complete academic freedom, actually more than I've found in any university where I've taught, where I could do or say whatever I wanted and nobody interfered with me. And I know over time I caused them a lot of heartburn, but they left me alone. And, it's a think tank, for those who don't know, is basically almost like a university without students. Although, there are people, AEI had two titles, fellows and scholars. Scholars were those whose careers had been built in universities and academia. Fellows were those who had come out of government or another area of private life, um, although many of them were serious intellectuals, and they did research. But what distinguished it from a university was a couple of things. One is trying to take the academic work and uh, turn it into something practical, including interacting with politicians and policymakers to try and implement public policy, instead of just having academic books and articles go up that are used in universities or read by, 1,000 like-minded scholars. And the second is the public facing of it, interacting with journalists, with the public, doing public education and not just academic work. And back when I started as an academic, and very early on, I was writing for newspapers and doing especially public television in the early 1970s. That was frowned upon by many universities, that you weren't supposed to popularize what you were doing. You were doing serious academic work. Think Tank had exactly the opposite perspective. And I have to say, universities now and a whole lot of faculty, including especially our political scientists and economists, now see interfacing with the public or with different publics as at least as significant as the academic work that you do.
You've been doing it for a long time and you've been
Hmm.
through a number of what I call political eras. When I was a kid, and even as a young adult, I could identify what I call statesmen on both
Yep.
sides of the aisle. I mean, literally dozens on both sides of the aisle. I mean, I've told the story that, you got a guy like Orrin Hatch, who was a Mormon,
Yep.
teetotaling conservative that was dear friends with Ted Kennedy. You had Tip O'Neill, who was the first guy to visit Ronald Reagan after he'd been shot in the hospital, who had a genuine affection, totally different political perspectives. But Norm, I can't think of a single statesman today. It is driving me crazy, the lack of any sort of collaboration or cooperation or compromise in American politics today. I've never seen anything like it.
So I have to tell you, Rick, that one of the fortunate elements of my career, it's a little bit of a Zelig-like experience, but having been immersed in our politics and policy in Washington for 5.5+ decades, I have gotten to know and developed relationships with an extraordinary range of those we would have called statesmen, people who became my mentors, and they crossed every spectrum. So among them were Ted Kennedy, and I was friends with Orrin Hatch back when he served. Alan Simpson was a very dear friend and mentor of mine. Elliot Richardson, Ed Muskie, Walter Mondale. In Minnesota alone, Don Fraser, who was a member of Congress I worked for when I came as a congressional fellow, became the mayor of Minneapolis, a towering figure. Nancy Pelosi. I could go on and on. I was very close to John McCain and had a significant role in a lot of the work that he did on campaign finance, among others. There are people I admired. There are people that I thought were what we hope to have in our political system and in our society. And unfortunately, I'll tell you others. I helped to create the National Commission on Public Service and became very close to Paul Volcker. And I now serve on the board of the Volcker Alliance, helping out with public service. Father Hesburgh was a member of that commission, and I bonded with him. The definition of a statesman, when Ted Hesburgh, the president of Notre Dame, spoke, everybody listened. And we don't have that. You're right. We live in an age of tribalism. And in that age of tribalism, anybody who steps up to try and speak for the community, deal with those larger values, gets dragged down. Good example, Warren Buffett, who you may remember at one point, and Warren Buffett, who has tried to lead the way with billionaires, pledging that they'll give away 95% of their assets, not just turn them over to their children for charitable reasons. When he spoke up and said, I can't think of any reason why I should have a lower tax rate than my secretary, the Wall Street Journal and others attacked him as a dangerous leftist. Whenever you say something that conflicts with the ideology of others, you're going to be attacked. So it's almost impossible for somebody. Another one, Lee Hamilton, was somebody I was close to, member of Congress for many decades. You are dragged down. Look at what happened to Pope Francis. Look at what's happened to Pope Leo, who, by the way, would be my candidate for president. He's an American. No reason you can't serve as Pope and president at the same time. But you speak up about common values, and it turns out they're not so common anymore. And what has astonished me, to be blunt, is having worked for decades with members of both parties, to see Republicans in the House and Senate, some of whom I did work with and admired, showing a lack of moral character and spine as we move to tribalism and to a cult, has been one of the most shattering and disappointing things in my adult life.
Well, I feel the same way. You mentioned you were a moderate. Somebody asked me one time politically what I was, and I said, I'm an Eisenhower Republican. And they said, well, what is that? I said, well, both parties tried to nominate him in 1952. Yeah. I mean, that's how close we were.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting.
Half the African-Americans voters supported Eisenhower.
Yeah.
They were Republican at that time, before the Republican Party basically took over what the Southern conservative segregationist Democrats had been.
Right. What we called Dixiecrats when I was growing up, and, led by guys like Strom Thurmond and others who later switched parties. But I don't, we just seem to be in an era where everybody, it used to be you could disagree without being so damn disagreeable.
Yeah.
And now, like you said, the ugliness, it's just almost out of control. And it's the finger pointing and like you said, the tribalism. I think part of it is social media and the algorithms that feed us the same perspectives over and over and over again to where we think that's the only way. I think that's contributing to it. I do believe both sides of the aisle, there is a horrible distrust of the media. It's like the media, whether they are or not, is manipulative. There's more opinion than facts. I'm a child of, Huntley and Brinkley and, Walter Cronkite and people that you actually believed in to tell you the truth at 6 o'clock every, weeknight. You don't you don't seem to have that anymore. Can we fix American politics at our age? I'll say one more thing.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think we have a very uneducated populace. We don't teach history anymore. We don't teach civics anymore. And so in a civil society, understanding what we believe, why we believe, and the fact that somebody might have a differing opinion and that's okay, we don't teach that anymore. But can it be fixed?
We got a long slog ahead, Rick. I will say, I want to mention something I say at least every week, if not more, from another mentor and dear friend, the late Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Pat wrote a piece called Defining Deviancy Down. And the idea was that you have a web of social norms, and the norms have shoulds and shouldn'ts, and shame applies if you violate those norms. But if they get eroded a little, becomes the new normal. And then we keep defining deviancy down. And we've done that. And some of it started, frankly, with Newt Gingrich. Newt had a strategy when he first came to Congress, and Tom Mann and I set up a series of dinners with the class of 1978. We had 8 freshmen coming in who met every 6 weeks or so for a off-the-record dinner just to track them through their first 2 years in Congress. And Newt was one of them. So was Dick Cheney, by the way. And another was Geraldine Ferraro. And Newt, when he first came in, had already a full-blown strategy with tactics for how they could take back and make a Republican majority in Congress, and it included creating tribalism, destroying the House so much that people would say, hey, anything would be better than this, throw the ins out, bring the outs in. Took him 16 years, but after 40 consecutive years of Democratic majorities, the Republicans became a majority. But he poisoned the well by turning our politics from something where Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy could look at each other and say, you're so misguided, but you're a good person. You want to try and solve problems. Here's a problem, children's lack of health insurance. Let's work together to fix it. Treating people as patriots. What Newt did was to turn it into something where they're not misguided good people. They're the enemy trying to destroy our way of life. And that's what's happened to our politics. At the same time as we've defined deviancy down, there's almost nothing that creates a web of shame anymore. Racist used to be the worst epithet you could apply to somebody. Now people embrace it. You can say anything and do anything. And while social media have been a major accelerator of all of this, it also goes back not just to Newt, but to the rise of tribal media, including cable television, talk radio, that also have built business models built on divisiveness. And I'm with you on Cronkite, Huntley, Brinkley, and what the 3 network news shows did, what Bill Paley at CBS knew, that even if the CBS News was a loss leader for the network, it was important to maintain its integrity. And now look where we are. A handful of billionaires kowtowing to Donald Trump are dominating our media, CBS, CNN, and social media. They control Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, all of those influences that are viewed or listened to by the vast majority of Americans. And you're right about the ignorance. A part of it is civic education has gone by the boards, but a part of it, which I understand, is if you're just trying to make a living, put food on the table, pay the gas bill, pay your rent, or pay your mortgage, you don't have a lot of time to follow what's going on. There's one other element here, though, Rick, that I think is very important. And that gets to the fact that most people don't pay a lot of attention to this stuff. If there's a scandal, the media have to pound it away day after day to penetrate the consciousness of people who don't pay attention to a lot of what's going on. Steve Bannon, Trump's advisor, in 2015 said, "We've got the way to deal with this. We flood the zone with scandal after scandal after scandal, and they all wash over, and then people get, it's all trivialized." And that's what we've seen. And we have a mass media, including our mainstream media, who don't know how to handle abnormal behavior. They try to normalize it all. So you have Donald Trump lying over and over again. And much of the media, because he's the president, they take what he says at face value until the lie is discovered, and then it becomes an absolute secondary story. And that's a problem that we have with our mainstream media, not to mention the fact that so much of the media is biased in one direction or the other.
Well, I think it was Nikita Khrushchev who said at one point, I don't need to conquer America. At some point, America will rot from within. And we may be seeing it, decades later where there's part of that. The other thing, though, is the cost of running for public office. A couple of decades ago, I actually considered running for governor in South Carolina, and then you realize what it was going to take financially to raise the kind of money.
Yeah.
And I often think, I saw a Senate race recently where I think they spent $300 million on a Senate race. And I thought, man, what I could do with $300 million to help people. I mean, the media people are glad to get that $300 million in TV advertising and all that. But it's like the money has just warped everything and distorted things to the point that I think there's a number of good people out there that have kind of thrown up their hands and said, I can't do anything about it. But I often quote from what I call the gospel of Jimmy Buffett. And, in Margaritaville, he starts with, well, it's nobody's fault. And the second stanza, he goes, well, it could be my fault. And by the last stanza, he goes, it's my own damn fault. And it is a little bit of our own damn fault right now that we've allowed that. I like your comment about Pat Moynihan and the gradual decline in morality and civility to where we think that's the new norm is weighted down. I never would have believed in my lifetime that a president of the United States would actually use a 4-letter word publicly in a press conference or demean people asking questions and those kinds of things. And it's unbelievable. I want to switch gears for a minute. We're also seeing, as a Jewish American, I'm seeing a resurgent in anti-Semitism. And I can't decide, is it really anti-Semitism or is it, in our country, anti-Israel because of the so-called projected image that the Palestinians are being persecuted, by the country of Israel. But I'm a Christian. I've never understood anti-Semitism. I have lots of great Jewish friends. I just don't intellectually understand it. I don't get it. But it's there, and it's becoming very alarming right now.
There's no question. And I think some of it is that there was always anti-Semitism, but it was dangerous for people to express it publicly because they would be shamed or there would be consequences. And now there aren't any. And it's part of this broader fabric of what we're talking about. Being openly anti-Semitic costs you nothing these days. At the same time, the involvement of Israel is a complicated one. It is hard to, as a Jewish American who's been a supporter of the state of Israel, who knows the history. I was born in 1948, the beginning
Yeah.
of the same birthday as Israel. Um, Understanding millennia of persecution, um, having a place where Jews could go in the aftermath of the Holocaust. That's one thing. But now to separate out criticism of the current government, and frankly, it's something that, as an American, patriotic American, criticizing the current administration doesn't mean I don't love my country. Uh, Criticizing Israel's government doesn't mean I don't believe in the right of Israel to exist. But some of the things that the Israeli government is doing, the fact is, to be blunt about it, somebody like Ben Gvir, uh, a minister who is behaving in a vicious fashion, is a Jewish Nazi. And what they've done to Palestinians in the West Bank, what they've allowed to happen, what's happened in Gaza in the aftermath of the horrific attack on October 7th, it's really difficult to separate out your criticism of behavior without having people seize on it as anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, and anti-Semitic. And what also has happened is that enough of the media whip people up that it encourages those who are unstable into vicious, brutal, murderous attacks on all Jews. And of course, one of the things that's happened is that for people who are anti-Israel, it is very easy for them to manipulate this into being anti-Jewish. And that we're seeing in a lot of places in the country. And it's a difficult needle to thread. And it's one I have to say that the New York Mayor Mamdani is finding difficult to thread right now.
No, there's no question about it. I mean, the problem is, I think, in its simplistic form, we like black and white answers in a shades of gray world. And so, I used to say to somebody, the highest thing the highest level of friendship is to give someone the right to be wrong.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, which is an arrogant statement that it says you were right to begin with. Sometimes, I said, I'm frustrated by people that attack somebody for being a flip flopper. And I go, haven't we all changed our mind?
Yeah.
I used to like vanilla ice cream and now I like strawberry. Does that make me a flip flopper? I mean, you learn with maturity that you could be wrong. I read something really interesting the other day where, Henry Fonda had become estranged from Jane. Henry was a, very pro Republican, pro
Yeah.
Vietnam, and Jane, obviously Hanoi Jane was the opposite. But literally on his deathbed, he said to her, "I was wrong. I was wrong about Vietnam. I was wrong about that." And looking back, but it seems like if you change your mind, the media paints you as being a flip flopper, where it seems like that would be something to celebrate, that you're more enlightened today than ever before, and yet we don't do that.
Yeah. Part of the problem, Rick, is that there's a lot of research in psychology that when you come to believe something, your synapses work in such a way that if you get incontrovertible evidence of the opposite, you try to deny it. So it's, for many people, a bridge too far to change if they've come to believe something. And that's where our current problem, and it's a problem that's going to be worsened by modern technology, including AI. If a lie gets out there and people embrace it, it becomes very difficult for them when it turns out the evidence is that it's a lie to say, oops, I was wrong, because it challenges your very self. And we're going to have an interesting case of this now with the blatant lies that Donald Trump is telling about the reflecting pool in Washington. Uh, the reflecting pool, as we know, he took a fraudster crony of his, gave him over $14 million in taxpayer money to presumably fix this reflecting pool, which is stretches from the Lincoln Memorial out towards the Washington Monument, historic in so many ways. And it's been plagued with problems for a long time with the water supply. But he insisted that the company of this crony of his, which had no experience in it, should repaint the bottom in a bright blue and help to deal with the issues. There's always been a small problem with algae growing in it. And it turns out, of course, that it completely exacerbated the problem because the blue reflected, heated the water more, created more of a problem with algae.
More algae.
And
Yeah.
and then it turns out, of course, that the coating that they put on was faulty and the pieces began to come apart and float to the surface. And this is an area that has 24-hour surveillance cameras, always has people around it. And he's claiming that a group of people, ostensibly in scuba gear, went to the bottom, slit 250 or 350 feet across, and poured in all kinds of chemicals. We know that when the algae began to appear and it turned a fetid mass of green that smelled, it stunk, and was endangering the wildlife there, he had park authorities come and pour in tons of hydrogen peroxide, which also contributed to poisoning the water and created an enormous problem. And Trump is blaming it on Antifa, basically. It's just so patently false. But Fox News is running with that. They know it's false. They're running with it. Lots of people believe this. And when it turns out that one part of the problem may very well be that when the pool had been emptied and the coating had been put down, Trump drove his motorcade through the pool, all these heavy limousines and SUVs, that may have cracked the surface of it. But whatever it was, it's going to cost the country and taxpayers many millions more. And it will turn out that this was, stupidity. I will wager to you that 30% of Americans will continue to believe, even in the face of obvious evidence, that this was the result of some crazy leftists destroying the pool.
Well, I was friends with the late Bob Knight, and he was notoriously hard on the media. But he
And on
said
his own players.
yeah, but he said that his father got up every day and read the paper cover to cover and believed every word of it.
Yeah.
And so the accountability in the media, and like you said, when certain factions, and again, I think it's both sides, when certain factions take views and continue to harp, and we don't ever get to the truth because, like you said, the you tell enough lies and people believe it. And for years, I worked in the sports business, and if you would ask people who was the most brand loyal audience of what sport in America, they would tell you NASCAR, and it was a lie. But NASCAR said it long enough, and they would say we have the most loyal audience, so people believed it. Statistically, the most loyal sport audience in America was rodeo, believe it or not, and so the statistics showed it was rodeo that had the most loyal. And a great example of that was Coors Banquet beer had about a 0.5 share of the American beer market, and yet they had about a 30% share of the rodeo market. And it was a good proof from that standpoint. I want to close politically with this. It's 2026. We've celebrated our 250th birthday. How do we get back to solving problems? How do we get back to reducing tribalism? How do we get back to a level of civility that made our country such a great country? What do we got to do?
It's going to take a long time, Rick. One other example here, and a part of the problem is, the framers created this political system including especially the first branch, which is supposed to be the most dominant among them, Congress. Congress comes from the Latin word meaning to come together. They deliberately chose that term instead of parliament, which comes from the French meaning to speak. We know in a parliamentary system, you have a government, it decides, and basically the speaking is that the minority, which votes against everything, has a question period where they can at least get their point of view across. But there's that's the limits of the debate. A Congress in this large, diverse country was supposed to be people coming together face to face, debating each other, seeing how things were from other people's perspective, and organically coming to decisions that would be at least accepted by the broader public. But it starts with an expectation that you're all going to see the problems as problems, even if you have very different viewpoints on how to solve those problems. Look at climate change. How do you get back to dealing with a problem when half the political system believes it's a hoax, and no matter what evidence there is to the contrary? And I just, one of my friends who served in Congress for 12 years from South Carolina, Bob Inglis, very conservative, came in with Newt Gingrich, served for 6 years, was terrible, was one of these bomb throwers. Had a 6-year term limit, self-imposed, left, came back 6 years later, a changed man, not in his viewpoint, but an understanding that there had to be a better way. And he's made his issue climate change. He said, I realize that it's real. I don't want regulations or government to impose solutions. I want to look at the free market, but let's debate that. You can't debate it if you don't believe it's a real problem. And unfortunately for us, given the media, given the social media, given their business models, which promote divisiveness and promoting falsehoods, given the next generation of Republican lawmakers especially, but we're starting to see it a little bit on the Democratic side, but the Republican lawmakers coming forward, the school board members, the party officials, the state legislators who will move into national office, they make the Freedom Caucus look mild by comparison. So it's going to take a generation or more to get us back to understanding that first we're Americans, then we may be partisans, that we have a common set of problems, and we have to try and compromise and have give and take to be able to solve those problems. And frankly, the Supreme Court makes this far more difficult. You mentioned money in politics. As I mentioned before, I worked with John McCain on campaign finance reform. Imperfect, but it began to put some constraints on big money. Citizens United blew that up. And now we have a handful of billionaires who dominate the spending in our politics. And it's not a good thing, and it makes it harder for us to get back. But I will say one more thing on that front. I believe most Americans are fundamentally decent people. I know I have relatives, I have friends who are ardently pro-Trump. But put that aside for me, and if I had to depend on them, if I were in a crisis or had an emergency or needed somebody to sit for my dog or needed to take care of a sick relative, I could rely on them.
Yeah.
And what we need is a major focus on returning to decency. If we appeal to the better instincts of people, then maybe it'll take us a little bit less time to come out of this. But what I also know is if we somehow muddle through this and get a different government in place, one that believes in the rule of law, that doesn't believe in punishing your enemies, whatever it does to the Constitution or the law, we can't just let those who have perpetrated the violence against our citizens, against our neighbors, against us, just go away scot-free. That means we're going to need, among other things, the bar associations to step up and disbar lawyers who have lied to the courts or perpetrated um, violence against people against the law and the Constitution. And we're going to need to hold people accountable who have violated the law and violated the Constitution. And that's tricky because then it becomes an eye for an eye. So, how we get through that, if we're able somehow by 2029, doing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, finding leaders who can rise above it and somehow try to appeal to the better nature of our Americans. Um, we're going to have a lot of time. And frankly, most of us baby boomers are probably going to be gone by the time we reach a different place.
I have a good friend, John Sexton, former president at
Yeah,
NYU,
I know, John.
and he's working on a thing that he calls the Reconciliation Project. That we need to teach reconciliation skills. He's trying to do it at the collegiate level with a number of universities to try to get the best and the brightest to begin to realize that we have got to have differing opinions. And we've got to listen to the other person. Because, the sad thing is we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And we think we're right all the time. And, we're not right all the time. I mean, again, Jimmy Buffett wrote another song that said, just remember, you might end up being wrong. And we're all that way. I recently wrote a book called The Business Tithe, and it's biblically based, Judeo-Christian scriptures. That my premise is this: if every privately held business in America, and there are 35 million of them, would donate 10% of their profits to some cause that they care about, then I don't need the federal government. I think we got to get back to helping. Like you believe in the free market. I believe in capitalism with all my heart and soul, but capitalism without compassion is a problem. When you put compassion and you use capitalism as a liberator of human beings and you use it as a means to give back to others, it works. It may not be the greatest, but it's the best we've got. And I think we need to get back to doing that. Speaking of that, you had a tragedy in your life with losing your son, Matthew, and you've turned what I call tragedy into something positive. There's a wonderful quote on the foundation's website. It's a Joe Biden quote, again, who lost a son. And it said, I tell people that when a family experiences tragedy, the most important thing they can do is turn their grief into purpose. I love that quote, and y'all have done that with Matthew's Foundation. Talk a little bit about the foundation and what it does, because it's pretty rare that people do turn tragedy into something positive.
Yeah, thank you for that. When we lost our son, we realized we had two choices. One was to curl up into a ball, into a fetal position, and just mourn an unspeakable loss. And the other was to try and make something out of that unspeakable loss. And we decided on the latter. And Joe Biden, when he was vice president, called us up a day or two after our son died and spent an hour on the phone with me and my wife and my other son, Danny. And that had an impact on us. You know, whatever you think of Joe, whatever you think of his flaws, he is a man of genuine, deep empathy. And so we created this foundation and we decided to go in two directions. Our son had, at the age of 24, a brilliant young man who had been a national champion high school debater, excelled at Princeton, was doing well in Hollywood, had a psychotic break. Um, Part of the phenomenon of his serious brain disease was something called anosognosia, which is you have no awareness that you have an illness. So he would not get treatment, and he went through 10 years of sheer hell. We, as a very well-connected family, were helpless. And whatever pains we had, he had 10 times as much. And he died accidentally at age 34 of carbon monoxide poisoning in a motel room. So we wanted to work on fixing a broken mental health care system. but we also wanted to, which we knew he would hate because he didn't believe there was such a thing as mental illness.
Right.
Um, but we also wanted to focus on his debate experience, and his debate partner and best friend, who was with him out in California, said, look, we were national champion debaters in high school because we had the resources. And my son spent before his junior and senior years in high school at 7-week debate camps at the University of Michigan. It was an expensive tuition, but that's how you were able to compete. His partner, Alex Berger, did it at Dartmouth. What about all those who don't have the resources and who can't do debate the way our kids could do at an expensive private school, or others at, the very Tony public schools that are out there, like Harvard Westlake and others in Los Angeles? So we decided to create a debate camp free to public school kids in the Washington, D.C. area. We joined together with an organization that had been moribund, the Washington Urban Debate League. We started 11 years ago with 30 kids. This coming summer, in 2 weeks, we will have almost 300, all free, including breakfast and lunch. They're all from this area, about half from the District of Columbia, about 40% from the nearby blue-collar Prince George's County, and some from other areas around, from rising sixth graders, fifth graders, 10-year-olds through high school. They learn a lot of substance because it's policy debate, one topic a year. This coming year's topic is going to be healthcare. The previous year we had NATO and the Arctic, which ended up being very timely previous years. And they learn life skills, and it's a ticket up to success. We've had well over 1,000 kids. 100% of our kids graduate from high school. They're mostly Title I schools, meaning schools where a majority of kids are eligible for free breakfast and lunch. They come from, many of them, from very tough neighborhoods, a lot of single parents. And every one of our kids who wants to go to college gets a scholarship. We do a college fair. The colleges flock to them because they know that kids who know debate, know how to write, know how to speak in front of any audience,
Know how
know
to
how to do
think.
research, know how to think, and have to do civil debate. And often, because in policy debate, you don't know going into a round whether you're going to have the affirmative or the negative.
Exactly. You don't know what side you're on, so you have to. Yeah.
You have to argue strenuously for something that's anathema to you, and you put yourself into the head of somebody who you would think of as evil and understand at least where they're coming from and how to counter those arguments. And it's changed lives. And, I'm retired now. I know that if you just stop, you're not going to live very long. So I'm still very active in pro-democracy things, but what has kept me going is this debate experience. We did a documentary on this. For those of you who haven't seen it, it was on public television in March. It's called Immutable, and you can watch it at pbs.org, or you can stream it at immutablefilm.com. The stars, by the way, Rick, are the single moms. And one of our stars is a star debater, an autistic young woman who didn't speak until she was 5, whose single mom didn't tell her she was autistic, regretted it later. And then when her kid was a few years older, saw her on the web researching autism. And despite that, and despite the drawbacks from that, she's become a fabulous debater. So you can, and now as they've moved special needs for education out of the Department of Education and put them in with RFK Jr., who has said autistic people will never have a job, will never be a part of society. You should watch this film to see what people with special needs can do if you give them the opportunities. It's a spectrum, and a whole lot of them will end up being hugely significant, positive contributors to this society and lead wonderful, productive lives. And that all of us should look for some way. This is one thing that, as a Jew, it is deeply embedded in our culture that if you save one life, you save the universe. And so anything you can do to help others who are in need is what makes you, as a human being, thrive. And there are too many people now who believe the opposite, including many from my religion and many from yours. And we need to appeal to their better angels, and we need to find ways, and you're absolutely right about the business community. I'll end with this, Rick. Among the things that I did over time and the mentors that I've had, at a young age, fairly young age, I got invited to speak at the business council meetings. The business council is the CEOs of the biggest companies, and they would meet twice a year at a resort called the Homestead. And I would go down and speak, and I'd interact with them. And generations ago, those CEOs included figures who were towering figures, true statesmen. One of them, Roy Vagelos, the longtime CEO of Merck. I spent a lot of time with, became good friends with. Roy Vagelos believed that as the steward of this company, it wasn't about squeezing as much money in the next quarter's profits. It was about recognizing that you're a part of the society and you have to make sure that the society thrives so that your company can thrive over the long run. There aren't very many Roy Vageloses out there now. CEOs now know that if they get as much as they can in the profits in the next quarter, that whatever happens to the company, they're going to have a golden parachute. They're going to end up with huge sums of money themselves. And now they are wedded to a group of people who do horrible things to the society, including destroying the workforce of the future, because they can get lower tax rates and less regulation. They are not looking at what their role is in the society. They're looking at this from the narrowest, most selfish viewpoint. And that's something we have to change.
That's a great place to leave. I'll say this. I've traveled 50 states in the last 18 months filming this United Taste of America, and I agree with you. There's a significant goodness in the American people. We just need to go back to harnessing that goodness. And what your foundation's doing now, I hope, is developing the right kind of leaders for the next generation. I've always said short-term greed is usually bad, and long-term greed is usually good. and
Yeah.
we need people to begin to think about the big picture and where we're going, because we're all just renting space on this planet. We're not going to be here forever. And, hopefully we're going to leave something behind better than the way we found it. Norm, I can't thank you. This has been a great talk today.
Let me just follow up on that for 1 minute, Rick, which is we did this film Immutable because we wanted to spread this debate experience to underserved communities around the country. And it's there in many places. I've watched some of these kids who are absolutely brilliant when you give them the tools. And what pains me as much as anything is the number of brilliant young people out there who will never get those tools. And that is not just a tragedy for them. It's a tragedy for all of us. We need brilliant people with the right approach to serving their communities and serving the society. And we're seeing, instead of broadening the opportunities for people, attempts to take them away. And we have to fight against that tooth and nail.
I agree. That's a great place to leave today. Hey, thanks, pal. This has been really, really good. And I'll send you the link once we post this thing. So thanks again. It's time to get back on the road with Rick. There are some great classic Jewish delis all across America. So many Eastern European Jews came to America because they were being persecuted. They were being persecuted in places like Russia and Poland and other Eastern European locations. And they came and largely came through Ellis Island. Many settled in the Northeast, but then they spread across the country in so many ways. But my favorite Jewish deli is still the classic Katz Deli. You remember it from the famous scene in the movie When Harry Met Sally. It was the famous orgasm scene where Rob Reiner, who was the director of that, had his mother as the customer who, when Meg Ryan had her orgasm, faked her orgasm in the restaurant, and they turned to Rob Reiner's mom, and she said, "I'll have what she's having." It's one of the great lines of all time. Katz Deli is a classic place. Started in 1888 down on the Lower East Side in a Jewish community. It's famous for lots of great Jewish foods, but I'm still an old-fashioned pastrami on rye, coleslaw and pickles, or maybe I'll get a Reuben sandwich, which is corned beef, coleslaw, sauerkraut and Russian dressing, Swiss cheese, maybe on pumpernickel bread instead of rye bread. And you drink an egg cream. You got to have an egg cream when you're there. The famous Katz Deli, if you haven't been there, next time you go to New York, you got to go to the Lower East Side and eat at Katz on the road with Rick. It's now time for the boom. You may remember that recently President Donald Trump kind of got in a little bit of a pissing war with the Pope. Probably don't want to do that. I've told you before that my favorite writer, columnist, is the great Peggy Noonan, another baby boomer, who writes for the Wall Street Journal. And she wrote an interesting editorial about this. And I won't read the whole editorial to you, but I'll sum it up with this. She said to President Trump, "I wouldn't get in a fight with the Pope. He's got better writers. They're called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John." Touché. And that's the boom. It's now time to take a trip down memory lane. I've been really lucky in my life to go to some of the great religious halls and places in the world. I've been to the classic Alhambra in Spain, the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, Notre Dame in Paris, the Great Synagogue in Budapest, the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., and St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. Each has reminded me that we as human beings seek God in a variety of ways. When I travel, I try to go to places of worship to visit, or maybe to attend services or concerts. It reminds me that we're all seeking the same thing, something and someone a whole lot bigger than us. That's my trip down memory lane. It's now time for the last word. I grew up in the Baptist church. First hymn I think we learned little was Jesus Loves Me. But the second hymn we learned was a thing called Jesus Loves the Little Children. All the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. I can't say it any better or simpler than that. And that's the last word. Thanks to Norm for being my guest, and thank you all for listening. We'll see you back here next week for another edition of Shaboom.